The pros and cons of short-term rentals and long-term rentals. First, what's the difference? Short-term rentals technically are rentals under 31 days. Long-term rentals are your traditional 12-month leases, and long-term rentals are typically unfurnished, while short-term rentals are typically furnished. So what are the pros and cons of these two types of rentals? Let me start with the pros of short-term rentals. I personally love short-term rentals. All my properties are indeed short-term rentals, and I'll probably continue to only buy short-term rentals. The reason why I love short-term rentals is because, first and foremost, they're just more lucrative than long-term rentals. You can earn more money from furnished rentals in highly desirable locations. I like the fact that they're more fun. I could use the property when they're vacant with my family and friends. This next point tends to surprise a lot of people, but short-term rentals, from my experience, are much better maintained than long-term rentals. And the reason why is because after every guest checks out, the place is professionally cleaned and looked over, and if there's ever a maintenance issue, it's taken care of right away, versus long-term rentals that have a 12-month tenant in there. They might not professionally clean it once or very few times throughout the course of their lease. So overall, short-term rentals, in my opinion, tend to be better maintained. Another reason why I like short-term rentals is because they tend to appreciate in value more so than long-term rentals. That's kind of a generic statement, but the reason why short-term rentals, in my opinion, tend to appreciate more in value is because they tend to be in more desirable markets, coastal communities, mountain communities, lake communities. So generally speaking, they tend to appreciate more in value over the long term. Another pro of short-term rentals might surprise some people, or it might just be surprising, but there's little risk of a bad tenant not moving out of your short-term rental versus a long-term rental where a bad tenant has a written lease for maybe about 12 months. With a short-term rental, there are no leases, there are just contracts. So always consult an attorney, obviously, but it's my understanding that with contracts, if you have a bad tenant, you can kick them out with reasonable cause. And last but not least, another pro of short-term rentals is that as a manager, you have the ability to control the income that the property is earning. So my properties will make more money if they get good reviews. They'll make more money if I set them up uniquely to stand out from the crowd. They'll make more money year after year as I have repeat guests. So I like the ability of having more control over the income my property can earn with a short-term rental. Now, what are the cons of a short-term rental? There are two cons in particular. First and foremost, short-term rentals are not passive. I always tell people they're basically a full-time job. You manage every aspect of the rental as if you're managing an actual business. And the second con of short-term rentals is that you'll probably have higher upfront costs. You'll have your down payment, your closing costs, your furnishing costs, the cost of the hardware that you'll need to set your property up, like smart locks and Ring cameras and things like that, and the cost of maybe hiring an assistant or hiring cleaners or maintenance people on call. So now let's talk about long-term rentals. What are the pros of long-term rentals? Well, the biggest pro in my opinion is that long-term rentals are much more passive. It's easier to build a portfolio of long-term rentals and self-manage that portfolio because there's much less work needed on a day-to-day basis to manage those long-term tenants. Now, what are the cons of long-term rentals? In my opinion, long-term rentals aren't as well maintained as short-term rentals. I made this point earlier, but short-term rentals are professionally cleaned every time a guest checks out, and most long-term rentals are hardly professionally cleaned and hardly maintained until a tenant is out after their lease expires. Another con of long-term rentals is that there is always a risk of a bad tenant, or any tenant, not moving out of the property when the lease expires. We saw this during COVID. There are many landlords that experienced tenants either not paying or not moving out in time, and landlords were stuck with properties that were not earning income, or stuck with properties that had tenants that just stayed past their lease. And the last con of long-term rentals, in my opinion, is that you have much less control over the rental amounts that the property can earn because your rent is really just based on the market. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath long-term rental will earn the same as other comparable 3-bedroom, 2-bath long-term rentals, whereas short-term rentals, you could make more money based on your pricing strategy, based on your design, based on how clean you present your properties, etc. So there you have it, the pros and cons of short-term rentals versus long-term rentals. Neither one is better than the other. It all just depends on what you, the investor, is hoping to do as you grow your real estate portfolio.